Today, we'll be discussing the legal framework of public fiscal administration in the Philippines. Our presentation will cover the constitutional basis, key laws, budgeting, borrowing, accounting, auditing, and the roles of key government organizations. We'll also tackle some current challenges and recommendations for improvement. Let's start with a brief history. Before we delve into the specifics, let's set the stage. This presentation aims to provide a clear understanding of how our public funds are managed, legally speaking. We'll be looking at key concepts like taxation, budgeting, and auditing, so that we can better understand where our taxes are directed. Our objectives are to identify key laws, analyze existing issues, and understand the roles of government agencies. Now, let us begin the discussion on the brief history of our public finance system. The history of our public finance system is long and complex. First is pre-colonial. Before the Spaniards arrived, resource management was localized within barangays. During the pre-colonial period in the Philippines, before the arrival of the Spaniards, the system of governance and resource management was decentralized and handled at the barangay level. A barangay was a small community or village led by a datu or chief. Each barangay operated independently and had its own rules, customs, and way of managing resources such as food, tools, land, and even trade. The datu, along with the elders and council members, made decisions on how to collect and use resources for the benefit of the community. They would ensure fair distribution and resolve disputes related to land or wealth. For example, if a barangay had access to fertile land for farming and nearby rivers for fishing, the datu would organize how these resources were used, such as assigning farming areas to families, managing fishing schedules, or storing surplus harvests for future use or trade with neighboring barangays. These resources were used to support the community and strengthen alliances through barter or shared festivals. Second is Spanish colonial period. The tributo system and polo y servicio were harsh forms of taxation and forced labor, primarily benefiting Spain. During the Spanish colonial period, the Spanish imposed systems of taxation and forced labor on Filipinos to support the colonial government and benefit Spain. Two major systems were: the tributo is a form of tax that every Filipino family had to pay, usually in the form of money, crops, or goods. It was required from males aged 16 to 60. The tributo was used to fund Spanish projects, military, and the lifestyles of Spanish officials, rather than for the benefit of local communities. The polo y servicio. This was a system of forced labor where Filipino men aged 16 to 60 were required to work for the government for 40 days a year, later reduced to 15 days. They were made to build roads, churches, galleons, and other infrastructure without proper compensation. This disrupted their livelihoods and families. Example: a farmer from a rural barangay might be taken away from his land to fulfill his polo y servicio obligation by working on the construction of a Spanish church. Meanwhile, his family still had to pay tributo in rice or money. This made life very difficult, as they lost both income and labor while still being heavily taxed. Next is American period. Modern fiscal systems were introduced, along with the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and investments in infrastructure and education. During the American period in the Philippines 1898 to 1946, the colonial government introduced modern fiscal systems to organize and improve public finance. This included clearer laws on tax collection, budgeting, and public spending. One major development was the establishment of the Bureau of Internal Revenue in 1904, which became responsible for collecting taxes more systematically and fairly. The American government used the taxes to fund infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and public buildings, and also prioritized education by building public schools and training teachers. This marked a shift from the previous colonial system, where taxes mostly benefited foreign rulers, to one where public funds were also used for local development. Example: a Filipino child during the American period might have attended a newly built public school where teachers used English as the medium of instruction. That school was funded by taxes collected by the Bureau of Internal Revenue. At the same time, new roads were constructed in their town, improving access to trade and services, another benefit of the modern fiscal system introduced by the Americans. And last is post-independence. We've seen shifts from import substitution to export-oriented growth, privatization, and recent reforms like the Train Law. The Local Government Code of 1991 also played a significant role in decentralization. After the Philippines gained independence in 1946, the country went through various economic and fiscal policy shifts to support national development. Initially, the government followed an import substitution strategy, which meant producing goods locally instead of importing them. Later on, it shifted to an export-oriented growth strategy, encouraging industries to produce goods for export to boost the economy. In the 1980s and 1990s, the government began privatizing many government-owned corporations to make them more efficient and reduce the burden on public funds. One of the most important reforms came in the form of the Local Government Code of 1991, which decentralized power by giving more fiscal and administrative authority to local government units. This meant that local governments could collect certain taxes and decide how to spend them based on their community's needs. More recently, the Train Law tax reform for acceleration and inclusion, implemented in 2018, aims to make the tax system more fair and efficient. It lowered personal income taxes for most workers, but increased excise taxes on goods like fuel and sugary drinks to fund infrastructure, healthcare, and social services. Example, after the Local Government Code was passed, a municipality in Palawan could now plan its own infrastructure projects, such as building a local health centre or school, using funds collected from local business taxes. With the Train Law, an ordinary employee saw higher take-home pay due to lower income tax, while the government increased revenue through higher taxes on fuel, which helped fund projects like roads and hospitals. The next thing we will discuss is the power of taxation, constitutional basis. Taxation is an inherent power of the state. First, due process. Taxes must be fair and reasonable. There have been cases that were challenged in the Supreme Court due to unclear provisions in the tax code. Due process in taxation means that taxes must be fair, just, and reasonable, and should follow proper legal procedures. The government cannot impose taxes arbitrarily. There must be a law that clearly defines who pays, how much, and why. Taxpayers also have the right to question or appeal tax decisions if they believe they are unfair or illegal. This principle protects citizens from abusive taxation and ensures transparency and accountability. It's not just something written in the Constitution, but something necessary for the government to function. However, the 1987 Constitution includes important limitations. Example, if the government suddenly imposes a new tax without passing it through Congress or without proper notice and explanation to the public, it would violate due process. On the other hand, when the Train Law was passed, it went through public consultations, legislative debates, and was officially signed into law following due process before being implemented. Second is equal protection. Similar taxpayers should be treated equally. The principle of equal protection in taxation means that taxpayers in similar situations should be treated the same under the law. The government must not favour one group over another without a valid reason. This ensures fairness and avoids discrimination in how taxes are applied or collected. However, the law may still allow for reasonable classifications. If two individuals earn the same income, they should pay the same amount of income tax. Taxing one more than the other without legal justification would violate the principle of equal protection. However, giving tax breaks to certain groups like senior citizens, persons with disabilities (PWDs), or small businesses is allowed, as long as there is a clear legal basis and public benefit, making the classification reasonable and not arbitrary. Third is no imprisonment for non-payment of poll tax. This protects citizens from unjust imprisonment. The principle of no imprisonment for non-payment of poll tax means that a person cannot be jailed simply for failing to pay a poll tax which is a fixed tax levied on individuals, usually for voting or residency purposes. This provision protects citizens, especially the poor, from unjust punishment due to poverty or inability to pay. It upholds the idea that basic rights, like liberty or suffrage, should not be taken away just because someone cannot afford to pay a fee. The fourth is uniformity and equity. The tax system must be fair. Uniformity and equity in taxation mean that the tax system should be fair and just for all taxpayers. Uniformity requires that taxes be applied equally to everyone within the same class or category. For example, all salaried employees earning the same amount should be taxed at the same rate. Equity, on the other hand, considers people's ability to pay. Those who earn more should contribute more, and those with less should pay less. This is known as a progressive tax system. And last is protection for religious, charitable, and educational institutions. These entities are given special consideration. The principle of protection for religious, charitable, and educational institutions means that these organizations are often exempt from paying certain taxes as long as they use their income and property exclusively for their mission or purpose. This special consideration is given because these institutions provide important services to society such as education, spiritual guidance, and help for the needy that align with public interest and welfare. For example, a church that uses its property solely for worship and religious activities is exempt from paying property taxes. Similarly, a non-profit school that reinvests all its income into educational programs or facilities can be exempt from income tax. However, if these institutions engage in commercial activities unrelated to their mission, like operating a for-profit business, they may be subject to regular taxes. Next, we will discuss the main tax laws and agreements. There are many laws that govern our tax system. These serve as guidelines for the fair and orderly collection of taxes. Let's take a look at some of them. First is the National Internal Revenue Code (NIRC), officially known as Republic Act No. 8, 4.2. 4 is the main law that organizes and compiles all national tax rules and regulations in the Philippines. It covers various types of taxes such as income tax, value-added tax VAT, estate tax, excise tax, and documentary stamp tax. The NIRC provides the legal basis for how taxes are assessed, collected, and enforced by the Bureau of Internal Revenue. For example, when an employee receives a monthly salary, the withholding tax deducted from their income is based on provisions in the NIRC. Likewise, a business that sells goods and services applies 12% VAT as mandated under this law. Any changes to tax rates or procedures, such as those introduced by the trade law, are also incorporated into the NIRC. Second is Tariff and Customs Code EO 0688. This governs the tariffs and customs duties on imported and exported products. The Bureau of Customs, or BOC, implements it to protect our local industries and generate revenue for the government. It is important for the country's trade and economy. For example, when a company imports goods like smartphones from another country, the Bureau of Customs (BOC) applies customs duties and tariffs based on the value and type of goods. These taxes must be paid before the products are released. This system helps ensure that imported goods do not unfairly compete with locally made products, while also generating income for the government that can be used for public services. Third is Omnibus Investment Code EO 226. It provides tax incentives to attract local and foreign investments. Its goal is to stimulate the economy by encouraging businesses to invest. This is a way to help develop our country. For example, a foreign company planning to build a manufacturing plant in the Philippines may receive tax holidays or income tax exemptions under laws like the CREATE Act. These incentives reduce their tax burden for a certain number of years, making it more attractive for them to invest in the country. In return, they generate jobs, technology transfer, and economic activity, especially in special economic zones like those managed by PEZA, Philippine Economic Zone Authority. Fourth is Special Economic Zone Act. It establishes special zones that offer tax incentives for businesses. The Philippine Economic Zone Authority PEZA manages these zones. Its goal is to attract foreign companies and create jobs. For example, a Japanese electronics company sets up a factory in a PEZA zone in Laguna. Because it is located within a special economic zone, the company receives tax incentives, such as income tax holidays, exemptions from import duties, and simplified export-import procedures. In return, the company hires hundreds of Filipino workers, helping boost local employment and contributing to economic growth in the area. And last is tax treaties. These agreements between countries aim to avoid double taxation. They protect businesses and individuals from being taxed twice. This is important for businesses with operations in other countries. Now, let's talk about budgeting and public expenditures. Budgeting is a very important process in managing public funds. It shows us where the country's resources will be allocated. The Constitution sets the process for creating and approving the national budget. For example, the passage of the 2023 General Appropriations Act in Congress demonstrates this process. Transparency and accountability are essential in this process to prevent corruption. Next is the General Appropriations Act is the official budget of the national government. For example, the 2023 General Appropriation Act had an allocation of approximately 5.268 trillion for various government programs and projects. It is important to ensure that the budget is used properly and for the benefit of the people. Let's also discuss the borrowings and public debt. Government borrowing is a way to fund projects and programs, but it must be properly managed to avoid excessive national debt. The Constitution sets processes to ensure transparency and accountability in borrowing. There are also laws that govern government borrowing and debt management. First is Foreign Borrowings Act RA 4860. It sets the framework for contracting loans from other countries. The proper procedures must be followed to ensure that the loans are used correctly. For example, this is used for loans from the World Bank and ADB Asian Development Bank for infrastructure projects. Second is Presidential Decree No. 1177, Automatic Appropriations. The allocation of funds for debt payment is automatic. This addresses the need to ensure that there are funds available for debt repayment. For example, it ensures the timely payment to creditors. Third is Philippine BOT Law RA 7718. It allows build-operate transfer BOT agreements for infrastructure projects. This is a way to accelerate infrastructure development through the involvement of the private sector. For example, the government uses this for infrastructure projects that involve private sector participation, like the construction and operation of the North Luzon Expressway and LEX was done under a BOT agreement. Several water supply systems in the Philippines have been developed through BOT schemes involving private companies in building and managing the facilities before transferring them to the government, and the light rail transit LRT system in Metro Manila is an example of how BOT was used to improve public transportation. And last, the OD Act of 1996 RA 8182. It manages the acceptance and use of official development assistance ODA from other countries. This is important for the development of the nation. For example, it is used for development projects. Now, let's delve into accounting and auditing. Transparency and accountability in the use of public funds are very important. The Constitution mandates the proper maintenance of records and regular audits. The following laws provide the framework for accounting and auditing. First, the State Audit Code PD 1445. This governs the auditing of government accounts by the Commission on Audit. Its purpose is to ensure the proper and objective conduct of audits. This refers to the guidelines and rules that govern the auditing of government accounts by the Commission on Audit. The main purpose is to ensure that audits are conducted properly, objectively, and in accordance with established standards. These rules help promote transparency and accountability in the use of public funds. For example, Commission on Audit uses the Government Auditing Code of the Philippines Presidential Decree No. 1445 as a basis when examining how barangays or local government units spend their budget. If a barangay uses funds for a project, Commission on Audit checks if the expenses are supported by proper documents and if the project was really implemented as planned. Next is Administrative Code of 1987. This sets the responsibilities of government agencies in financial reporting. It is important to ensure the delivery of accurate and timely information to the public, which helps build trust and promotes transparency in government operations. Proper financial reporting also allows oversight bodies, such as the Commission on Audit, to monitor how public funds are managed and spent. For example, the new government accounting system provides guidelines for government agencies on how to record, summarize, and report their financial transactions. Under new government accounting system, a municipal office must submit regular financial statements showing its income and expenditures, which are then subject to audit and public disclosure. Now, let us discuss the major organizations in public fiscal administration. Many organizations play an important role in managing public finances. Proper coordination among them is essential for the efficient use of funds. First is Department of Finance, responsible for overall financial policy. This organization is in charge of setting the general direction and policies related to the country's finances, such as budgeting, revenue generation, borrowing, and expenditure. It plays a key role in maintaining economic stability and ensuring that public funds are used effectively. For example, the Department of Finance is responsible for managing the government's financial resources, formulating fiscal policies, and overseeing tax collection through its attached agencies like the Bureau of Internal Revenue and Bureau of Customs. It helps ensure the country has enough funds to support public services and development projects. Second is Department of Budget and Management. Responsible for the preparation and implementation of the budget, this organization ensures that government resources are allocated properly by planning how funds will be spent across different agencies and programs. It also monitors if the budget is being implemented according to plan, ensuring efficiency and accountability in public spending. For example, the Department of Budget and Management is the agency responsible for preparing the national budget and making sure it is implemented properly. For instance, the DBM allocates funds to various government departments such as the Department of Health or the Department of Education and checks if these agencies use the funds as intended. For example, National Economic and Development Authority provides recommendations on economic planning and policy. This organization plays a key role in guiding the country's long-term development by analyzing economic trends and proposing policies that support growth and stability. It helps ensure that government plans align with national goals and priorities. And last, Commission on Audit audits government accounts to ensure accountability. This organization is tasked with examining how public funds are spent to ensure they are used legally, efficiently, and for their intended purpose. Through regular audits, it helps prevent corruption and promotes transparency in government transactions. Critical issues in Philippine public finance. First is digital tax gap. The rapid growth of the digital economy poses challenges in taxing online businesses and transactions. We are losing significant revenue because of this. For example, many online sellers on platforms like Lazada, Shopee, or Facebook Marketplace are not registered with the Bureau of Internal Revenue, so their income goes untaxed. As a result, the government misses out on potential tax collections that could be used for public services. Second is infrastructure financing. Securing enough funds for infrastructure projects while managing the country's debt is a major challenge. Creative solutions are needed to finance these projects. For example, the government can use public-private partnerships to fund infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, or airports. In a public-private partnership, a private company invests in building the project and operates it for a period to recover costs, reducing the immediate financial burden on the government. This helps fund essential infrastructure without relying solely on loans. Third is climate change vulnerability. the increasing frequency and severity of climate-related disasters put a strain on the country's resources. Significant investment is needed for disaster preparedness. For example, the government needs to allocate more funds for early warning systems, evacuation centres, flood control projects, and disaster response training. For instance, building stronger dikes in flood-prone areas like Marikina or constructing typhoon-resilient housing in coastal communities can help minimise damage and save lives during natural disasters. Next is skills gap and human capital. The shortage of skilled workers hinders economic growth. Significant investment in education and training is needed. For example, industries such as construction, information technology, and healthcare often struggle to find qualified workers. To address this, the government can invest in technical vocational education and training or TVET programs through institutions like TESDA to equip individuals with in-demand skills such as welding, programming, or caregiving. This helps create a more competitive workforce and supports economic development. And last is inefficient intergovernmental fiscal transfers. The unequal distribution of funds between the national government and local governments leads to uneven development. A better mechanism for fund allocation is needed. For example, some local government units or LGU, especially in remote or rural areas, receive less funding compared to highly urbanized cities, limiting their ability to provide basic services or infrastructure. For instance, a small municipality in Mindanao may struggle to build roads or health centres due to limited funds, while cities like Quezon City have larger budgets. Implementing a more balanced internal revenue allotment or the Mandanas-Garcia ruling can help ensure a fairer distribution of resources across all local government units. Now, let us discuss possible strategies for a stronger fiscal future. To improve our financial system, here are some recommendations. First, modernizing tax administration. Invest in technology and training to effectively tax the digital economy and improve tax compliance. Modernization is needed to keep up with the times. Second is innovative financing mechanisms. Explore innovative funding methods, such as green bonds and public-private partnerships or PPP for infrastructure. Creative solutions are needed for financings. And third is climate-resilient budgeting. Include climate change considerations in budget planning and fund allocation to reduce risks. It is important to be prepared for the impacts of climate change. The fourth is invest in education and skills development. Give priority to investing in education and training to address the shortage of skilled workers. Education and training are essential for economic development. And last is reform intergovernmental fiscal transfers. Implement a more efficient and equitable mechanism for fund distribution between the national government and local governments. A better system is needed for inclusive development. And now let's proceed to the conclusion. In closing our presentation, it is clear that the legal framework of public fiscal administration in the Philippines is complex but highly important. From its long history to the challenges we face today, there is a need for strong law enforcement, transparency, and efficient allocation of resources. A strong and adaptable framework is key to inclusive and sustainable economic development in the Philippines. Thank you all for your valuable insights. Understanding these concepts is essential for a more prosperous future for all of us.